Guys, it's literally April, but it's snowing so much. Literally in March, the entire month was basically dry. There was no snow, and all of a sudden it's April now and it starts snowing a ton, which is super weird, but whatever. I like the snow anyway, so it's not really a problem for me. Hello guys. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in March. I read a total of 8 books. Some of them were for school, some of them were for my enjoyment, and I'm going to go through all of them today. Also, I'm going to see how fast I can talk because I'm really hungry. I want to eat lunch, but I also have a crap ton of homework to do. And I'm going back to my home tomorrow, and so I have to start packing for that. Also, I made myself matcha, so we're ready for a little tea sesh. The very first book I read was The Fraud by Zadie Smith. This book I read for my post-colonial literature class. It centers around a woman named Eliza Touchet during the Victorian era around the 1800s. And Eliza Touchet is a Scottish housekeeper for her cousin by marriage named William Ainsworth. William Ainsworth was a really popular novelist back then, but his popularity is sort of dying down because Eliza Touchet's realizing that he may not be the best author. But it centers around Miss Touchet and the Ainsworth family and sort of how they move through life within the Victorian era. But along with their family, the entire book centers around one historical moment, which is the Tichborne trial. The Tichborne trial was this huge event in the 1800s. I'm not going to explain the whole history of it. You can look that up for yourself. But the book centers around this trial where a lower class butcher from Australia claims that he's from Britain and he's a guy named Roger Tichborne. And it kind of threw the entire country in chaos because everyone's like, oh, who's the fraud? Who's the real Roger Tichborne? Where is the real Roger Tichborne? Is this Australian guy the real Roger Tichborne? And that's kind of the whole book. It's really, really long, but the chapters are insanely short, and I hated this book. We're starting off the month with a very low note, but I really did not like this book. I felt like you had to be a history buff in order to understand at least 75% of what was going on in this book. And that might just be me. That might just be because I'm dumb and uneducated.
Every thought in your mind is dumb. Every word you speak is dumb.
But I felt like there was so much historical context needed in this book. There are so many different historical references that you kind of just had to know. Zadie Smith doesn't really explain the context to you. You kind of just have to get it. And because the chapters are so short, you don't really get a lot of explanation. You're kind of just thrown into this historical world. It's such a weird book because it's so long, but it's so brief at the same time. There's so much going on, but there's not a lot of description. To me, it read like a history textbook, which is the worst thing ever. This is the very first book I've read from Zadie Smith. I don't doubt that she's intelligent. I don't doubt her abilities to write a good book. I just don't think this one was for me necessarily. Zadie Smith is also British. All of this history might just be in the British common knowledge. I'm not British, so I don't know all of these references. So I might not just be the target audience for this book, which is fine. I just really, really disliked this book. It was horrible. I will say though, the book does talk about a lot of different interesting themes, mainly fraudulence. Who is the fraud in this book? And how do we become our true selves in a society that forces us to put up a front and be this perfect version of ourselves? I can argue that every single character in this book is a fraud in one way or another. Specifically Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens has a spotlight in this book. There's a lot of discussions on how Charles Dickens is a fraud, how he's a fraudulent author, which is quite fun. I actually quite liked that part, but the rest was not fun. It also talks a lot about the art of writing. Just because William Ainsworth is an author, Charles Dickens is mentioned in here. There's a lot of writers in this book. And so it just talks about the nature of writing. And essentially, there's this sort of argument that all authors are frauds because we essentially make up these stories about real life people and real life events. We're making up these stories in order to tell the truth. We're lying in order to tell the truth, essentially. And that's kind of what Miss Touchet talks a lot about. And that was interesting, but it wasn't interesting enough to keep me reading. If I didn't read this for class, I would have dropped it by the 3rd chapter. And because the chapters are so short, the 3rd chapter is at like page 5. I wouldn't recommend this necessarily unless you're like a history buff and you know a ton about the Victorian era and you know a ton about this time period. which is not me. I don't know anything about the time period, and it was just a slog. I felt like a book this long, you have to be engaged the entire time. You have to make me want to read all... How long is this book? You have to make me want to read all 450 pages, but it was just awful. I couldn't. On a brighter note, I also read M. Butterfly by David Henry Hwang, which is a play, and I read this for my world literature class. This was magnificent. This was spectacular. It was really, really good. M. Butterfly follows a French diplomat named René Gallimard who lives in China for a period of time. And in China, he falls in love with a Chinese woman named Song, but it turns out Song is not really a woman. Song is a male communist spy for the Chinese government. And it talks about their relationship, but it also talks about bigger themes like gender and cultural stereotypes, how gender stereotypes perpetuate cultural stereotypes, and how the West sort of paints the East as this feminine, submissive culture that is waiting for the West to dominate them. The West has this image that they are more masculine, that they are more dominant, that they're able to conquer the East. And it's a really harmful stereotype, and this book deconstructs that stereotype by picturing Song as a male and a female at the same time. And it really asks you, who's in power? Is the West in power or is the East in power? And it throws this binary off balance. It's only 100 pages long, but it was so brilliantly done. It's one of the weirdest plays I've ever read. I've never read anything like it, but it was so fascinating because I just love the discussions on gender and cultural stereotypes and the images that these cultures have of each other. This is my interpretation, but in the end, not one culture has power over the other. They kind of depend on each other. Song and Gallimard, I would say they equally depend on each other. There's an equal desire for them to be both dominant and submissive at the same time, but it just really makes you think about your own preconceived notions of culture and of identity, and it breaks them all apart. It's so weird, but I love books that take that weirdness and bring out something in humanity like this one, and it was just so brilliantly done. I highly, highly recommend this. It's a really short play. I'm pretty sure you could finish this in a day or two. Excellent stuff. I really liked this one. Guys, my stomach just growled. This next book I read is probably going to be a new favorite for me. This one is Dear Dickhead by Despentes. This is a French novel translated by Frank Wynne. This entire book is told completely in emails between Oscar, who is a B-level novelist, and Rebecca, who is an actor who is slowly fading away from stardom because she's getting older. The entire conversation starts when Oscar goes online and talks about how Rebecca is becoming old and ugly. And so Rebecca hits him up and says, "Dear Dickhead, you're being a dick." And it kind of spirals from there. Bear with me now, but this book feels like someone slaps you across the face, smiles at you, and then gives you a warm hug. This is kind of how I imagine this book. It's so warm and comforting, but at the same time, it's so raw and it doesn't shy away from the truth. It feels like an exercise in empathy for me because it's just filled with so much humanity. And that's what I loved so much about this book. Even though it's completely told in emails, Rebecca and Oscar never ever see each other in person once. Oscar tells Rebecca, "I think you're the closest person in my life. I feel so close to you." And that just kind of tells you how in human connection, it doesn't really matter about the proximity. It matters about how you're able to empathize and understand each other. And that's sort of the basis of humanity and human relationships and human connection. All of these characters are flawed in one way or another. There is no perfect character in this book, and that's what makes them feel so incredibly realistic. For example, Oscar has done some incredibly horrible things that he's not willing to admit, but Rebecca calls him out for it. Rebecca says, "No, you're in the wrong," and she's telling him this because she wants him to change. She believes that he has the ability to become a better person, and so she sits and listens to him without necessarily bullying him or over-criticizing him. She's telling him the truth. It's like that thing when I said Rebecca's literally slapping him and then hugging him at the same time. It's so warm. And Rebecca, she's a very angsty girl, but I love her. I love her for it. It's just such a heartfelt book that talks about a lot of different themes like your identity, feminism, loneliness, addiction, the film industry, the publishing industry, how these industries are dominated by gender stereotypes, and so much more. I think the ending is just perfect. This book is a lot more philosophical than I realized. like based on the title alone and based on the first few pages, you think it's a bit more comical, a bit more silly, but it becomes really, really deep and really, really philosophical, and it asks these deep questions about humanity and how to live. It was just so delicious, so delicious. I'm just super, super glad I got the chance to read this. Also, this book, part of this book takes place during the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't necessarily read books that take place during that whole fiasco because I've already lived through it. I'm not really aching to read more about it. And so I generally just avoid it. I generally like pieces that don't necessarily take place in one specific time period, but pieces that are timeless, that can take place in any specific time, if that makes any sense. But this one, even though it took place during a horrible time, it was still so good. And I think it was especially relevant during the whole 2020 incident because so many people have lost those physical connections with each other, and we're all online, we're all talking through Zoom, and it really asks the question, how do you remain close and connected to someone when you're separated hundreds of million miles away? And it's all through human understanding and empathy and just listening to each other. And it's such a relevant book, and it's so important today. I just love this so much. I recommend everyone read this. It's barely under 300 pages, but I flew through the book because, again, like I said, it's completely in email form, so highly recommend this one too. The next book I read is so incredibly dreamlike. It's We Do Not Part by Han Kang. This book follows a woman named Kyung-ah who gets an important message from In-sun, who is in the hospital after cutting off 2 of her fingers. And she tells Kyung-ah to travel through Jeju Island through a horrendous snowstorm to find her bird and feed it. That's sort of the overarching plot, but underneath, it focuses a lot on the Jeju massacre and this horrible part of history that seems to be forgotten, but it never really parts from us. It asks the question, how do we remember a history that's so brutal? Why do we remember this history? And it's such an important and relevant book. It was incredibly mesmerizing and dreamlike. The prose is just stunning. You never really know the difference between past, present, dream, reality. It's all just blurred in one into this mystical prose, and I ate it up. I ate it up. The majority of this book takes place in Jeju when Kyung-ah is navigating through this blizzard to find the bird. It talks about humanity, the violence of humanity, how human nature is inevitably violent. We're inevitably violent creatures, and how do we cope with that fact? There's so many interesting descriptions, especially In-sun, who is in the hospital. Because her fingers are cut off, they had to sew the fingers back on, and every 3 minutes they had to prick the fingers again so that it would bleed in order for the blood to reach the nerves. It's so violent, but it's so necessary for living. You have to feel pain in order to live. Everyone just needs to read this. I feel like this one and Human Acts, these guys are siblings, in my opinion. They're very related. They talk about the violence in Korean history. This one talks about the Gwangju massacre, and this one's the Jeju uprising. Gwangju Uprising and Jeju Massacre. I think so. If you've read this one, you'll like this one, and if you read this one, you'll like this one. But Han Kang just won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and well-deserved. She's a brilliant woman. I saw in an interview of hers that she writes to cope with the fact that she is a human, and humans are violent creatures. And she writes to relieve her of that stress of being part of a human race that's so inevitably violent and harmful to the world. It's so interesting. Humans are so fragile, but yet they're so violent at the same time, and Han Kang talks about this in this novel. I cannot recommend this enough. I cannot recommend any of Han Kang's books enough. I just think they're all stunning. This one particularly is just a masterpiece, in my opinion, so highly recommend this one. The next book I read is A Separation by Katie Kitamura. This one is her 3rd book, right before she released Intimacies. Intimacies is one of my favorite books ever, and this one she released before that one. And I read this one because I felt like this one was quite similar in themes to Intimacies. So this one is about a young woman who is a translator who gets a call from her husband's mom that her husband Christopher is missing. But the narrator and her husband has not told the mom that they are separated. Not officially divorced, but separated. The mom figures out that Christopher is in Greece, and so she calls the narrator to travel to Greece to find him. It's highly introspective, and it's just gorgeous writing. It's typical Katie Kitamura, I will say, but I felt like this wasn't nearly as satisfying as Intimacies was. I feel like this one, she's still getting used to her form, and with Intimacies, she's able to perfect the art and she's able to realize her true potential. I'm personally just putting words in her mouth, but I feel like this one is a build-up to Intimacies, which isn't to say that it was bad. I think if you liked Intimacies, you might like this one as well, but I would push you to read Intimacies more just because I feel like that one's a more well-rounded book. This one is still really interesting. I just love the writing style and I love Katie Kitamura so much. So I read it, but it's highly, highly introspective. I think one of the biggest flaws of this book was the marketing, the advertising for it. I was looking online and it seemed like this book was mainly marketed as the next Gone Girl, which is like a mystery thriller. This is not Gone Girl. It's not a mystery thriller. It's not intense. It's more about the art of writing. She's just stuck in her mind thinking about all these events that are happening. She's very in her head the entire book, and that's what I like most about Katie Kitamura's writing is she's so descriptive about what this woman is thinking. She's so descriptive about how people interact with each other, and that's the main selling point of this book. It is not a mystery thriller. It's not anything of that sort. It talks a lot about humanity and the nature of violence, but it also talks about marriage. How do you love someone? How is love different from marriage if there is a difference? How do you love someone in a marriage? How much of a person do you really, really know? I feel like it does have a lot of the same themes as Intimacies does, but this one talks a little bit more about marriage, which is something that Intimacies lightly touches on. It was pretty good. It was really good. I liked this one. Would I recommend it? I would recommend this only if you're a huge fan of Katie Kitamura's work. I feel like if you're just getting started with her work, you should start with Intimacies. Around the time that I'm filming this, her new book, Audition, is coming out next week, which I will probably upload this after it came out. So Audition is probably out by now. I haven't read it yet, but I did pre-order it and I'm super, super, super excited to start reading it. I love Katie. I love her writing. I can't wait to see what she does in her new book. The next book that I read is The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. This is originally written in Italian and translated by Anne Goldstein. I don't know why, but I've never read Elena Ferrante before. This is my first book of hers. And I had this preconceived notion on how Elena Ferrante writes. I felt like her writing would be exquisite, beautiful, poetic, elegant, graceful, and just overall beautiful. But in reality, this book was just jaw-dropping. It was horrifying. It was raw. It was intense. It was full of rage and disgust and horror, and you really get a full picture of what it feels like to break down, what it feels like to spiral, and it's so haunting to me. This book follows a woman named Olga, and one day Olga's husband tells her, "I'm getting a divorce with you." And Olga is so confused as to why. She thought that they had this perfect happy marriage, and she suddenly feels this emptiness after having her husband leave her. They've been together for so long. She thought they had this happy relationship, but it turns out it wasn't all that happy. And so Olga's sort of questioning her reality. What's real? Am I even happy? But at the same time, Olga is left with their 2 kids. The husband's out of the picture, and she just kind of spirals and goes insane. She goes crazy. And it's a really short book, and I was just mesmerized by the prose, and I was just thrown into the story. It's definitely not the image that I had in mind of Elena Ferrante's work, but it was so much better. You get this clear image of Olga falling apart, and she's forgetting to do things. She's losing her mind. She's sort of acting without thinking, and you feel like you're going crazy along her. And I started to doubt myself while reading this because Olga is essentially one of the most unreliable narrators. Like you as the reader start to wonder if you've mistaken a moment as well. And Olga is such an interesting character because you view the world through her lens, but her lens is not really clear. I just loved this. It was so crazy. I felt like I was going insane while reading this, but it was so well done. I have yet to read My Brilliant Friend and the Neapolitan Quartet. I really want to, but I felt like because it's a quartet and the books are a little bit longer, I thought I'd start with the Days of Abandonment first to see if I liked it because it's shorter. And so I started with that one, and I do really like it. And I'm so ready to read My Brilliant Friend. Hopefully I'll start it soon, but we'll see. All right, I have 2 more books. The next book that I read is Exhibit by R.O. Kwon. I had the toughest time trying to review this book. I don't know, and I still don't necessarily know if I like this book because I love R.O. Kwon or if I like this book because the book was actually good. I went to the Tucson Festival of Books recently where I met R.O. Kwon and I got this book signed. And I went to 2 of her author talks and I heard her talk about this book, and she's just this brilliant woman. She makes her book sound amazing, and she's a really funny person. She's hilarious. She made me laugh out loud a lot. From that day on, I just fell in love with R.O. Kwon. I think she's such an intelligent woman. And so I picked up this book because it really interested me. This book follows 2 Korean women. One woman named Jin Han is a photographer who is taking a break because she's having a rough time with her photography, and a ballerina named Lydia Jung, who is also taking a break from her job because of an injury. The 2 women meet at this party and they find a sort of respite in one another, away from the rest of the world. But it also talks about a familial curse in Jin Han's family, which centers around a kisang, which is this Korean courtesan, I think? Courtesan? It's a really interesting premise, and the prose is not necessarily my favorite. There's a ton of commas in this book. Miss R.O. Kwon does not back away from commas. There are commas everywhere in this book, and it kind of made the reading experience a little bit broken up, but also so hypnotic at the same time. It's so difficult to review this book. I was having such a hard time with it because I felt that the writing style was so confusing and it was so hard to read, but at the same time I was so mesmerized, and I didn't necessarily know what was going on 100% of the time, but I just wanted to keep reading more. I wanted to know more about these women. So I was so conflicted. I didn't know if I liked it or if I just liked the author. But the book talks heavily about a woman's desires and how women can't live for themselves. Women have to live for other people. They have to take care of their husband, they have to take care of their kids, they have to be a good friend, they have to support other people. But it's sort of looked down upon when women do things for themselves. I will say, this book is quite kinky. There's a lot of steamy things that go on with this book without being too descriptive. There's not a lot of long and in-depth descriptions, which I like. It's very classy. It's very classy. But these women just can't live for each other. And so they look to each other in order to explore their own desires and explore their own wants. And it's a really interesting book, I think. But along with that, it also discusses religion and how Jin Han is battling with her own religion and how she's losing that religion, which sort of mimics R.O. Kwon's own journey with religion. I heard her talk about her own journey and how when she was, I think, in college or a teenager, she started losing her religion. She was a hugely religious person when she was a child. She wanted to become a saint. She wanted to devote her entire life to God. But when she grew up, she grew out of that faith and she's lost her faith, and she said it was not an easy process for her. It felt like she was losing her identity and losing a huge part of herself, and it was so devastating on her entire life. And this book kind of mirrors that in a way that Jin Han is also facing this loss of religion. And it was interesting, but it wasn't interesting enough, to be honest, because the religion in this book is only talked about in paragraphs. It's not full chapters, full descriptions that talk about Jin Han losing her faith. It's mainly paragraphs about Jin talking to God and saying, "Dear God, who I don't believe anymore," and she tells him what she's thinking and all that stuff. I don't know. It's still a pretty interesting book. I will say, I will only recommend this book if, 1, you like R.O. Kwon, and 2, if you are a heavy literary fiction reader. If you love literary fiction, if you love experimental work, sure, have a go at this book. But for most people, I don't think that's most people, but for most people, maybe avoid this one. It might be a little bit too experimental for you. For me, I think I sit right in the middle. It wasn't, I love experimental literature. I love reading literary fiction, if you can't tell already. but this one felt a little bit too abstract. I don't know, but I still love Kwon. I'll read anything she releases. Actually, I have her debut novel, The Incendiaries. This one focuses a little bit more about religion, and I'm really excited to read this one. So I'm still conflicted. I still think about this book because I don't know if I actually like it or not. That's why it's still a 3.5 stars for me. I'll just keep it at that. Okay, last book. The very last book that I read is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. The back says that this is a family saga, a forbidden love story, and a piercing political drama that takes place in India in 1969. It focuses around two twins named Esther and Rahel, but it's a bigger picture. It talks about their entire family while mainly looking through the lens of these two twins. And the entire book centers around the incident of the arrival of their white cousin, Sophie Mall. The book moves between past and present freely, and it explains the history of the family, but also the event of Sophie Mall's arrival. It was an interesting book. I read this for my post-colonial literature class, and I will say, I'm a little disappointed, if I'm going to be completely honest. I was expecting this to be a 5-star read. It has all of the elements to be a 5-star read for me, but I think it fell a little flat. I didn't necessarily resonate with the writing style. It's not really my favorite. And I think another thing that turned me off was just the circumstance. I feel like circumstance is incredibly important when reading a book. Where you are in life determines whether or not you'll like a book or not, in my opinion. And I felt like this just wasn't the right time for me to read this book. It's a very devastating book. It's very depressing. There are barely any good things that happen. It's just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. No, there's no breaks. I don't know. It was just a little too depressing at the time. I don't think I'll pick it up again though, which is kind of upsetting because I feel like I will like it again, but I just don't have I don't have a desire to pick it back up again. I feel like I'd rather much read books that I will enjoy. It's really morbid, and like I said, nothing good really happens, but this is also the first book in the entire semester that I fell behind on the reading. Typically, I'm really good at keeping up with readings for class. I always read on time. I always do the readings. I always come to class prepared, but this is the first time where I actually didn't finish the reading in time, and I couldn't finish the reading. I couldn't keep up because I felt like this book was just such a chore to read. But that's not to say that this is a bad book. It's a great book. I understand why people love it. People compare it to William Faulkner and Charles Dickens, and it's also the winner of the Booker Prize. So obviously it's highly loved, it's very well acclaimed, and for a good reason. It is very good, it's very important, it's very relevant. But one thing that I did like was the discussion on love and how in the entire book there's this recurring theme of the love laws that dictate who you can love, how you love them, how much you love someone. And it's really, really fascinating because Esther and Rahel, they learn this world based on these love laws. And to them, love is conditional. Love is transactional. You do something to get back love, or you do something and you lose that love. And it's not a very secure and healthy relationship with love. Poor kids. I mean, poor kids. They've had it rough. They've had it really rough. It's just filled with humanity, which is one thing that I did like. Would I recommend it? Yeah, I would recommend this. I think everyone should read this once when you're at a time in your life when you feel like you can read it. I'm just upset that I wasn't in the right time to read this, but nonetheless, I still highly recommend this one. Those are all the books that I read in March. Good stuff. I think I've only had one book that I highly disliked, which was The Fraud. Oh God, I hated that book. But the other ones were pretty good for the most part. I'm gonna end the video here because I'm really hungry and I want to eat lunch, but I also have to get started on my work. So if you've read any of these books, let me know what you think. You can follow me on Goodreads to read my full review on each of these books. I frequently update on there too. Thank you for watching. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.